The 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah were once some of the most respected people in the land. Leaders, geniuses, model citizens of the nation. But whether out of selfishness, desperation, or a willful surrender to the abyss, they fell so very far from grace. In Luna 2, we finally get our very first close look at one of the big bads of Genshin Impact. But the question is, was Rerir truly evil? Or was he way more human than we'd like to believe? This video took me much longer than usual to make, partly because I got sick right when the patch dropped and I got distracted. But today, finally, we're diving deep. This is the full lore breakdown and theory analysis of Luna 2, Acts 3 and 4, where we'll talk about Rerir, Tholindis, and what their story means for the future Archon Quests. We'll look at Durin's involvement, the mysterious figures working behind the scenes, and the possible truths about Nicole's real identity. Where is Dottore in all of this? And what did Hoyo shockingly and satisfyingly confirm about Sandrone? Let's start with Rerir. Before he was infamously remembered as one of the 5 sinners, Rerir was no one special. Just a quiet government worker with a steady job, a woman he loved, and a life that, on the surface, seemed completely ordinary. He wasn't exceptionally powerful. He wasn't noble. He was normal. But that's what makes his story terrifying, because somewhere along the way, something changed. And for centuries, no one really knew why. Not until Nefer came along. When Nefer began digging into Rerir's past during the Luna 2 Archon Quest, she discovered the secrets he maybe never meant for the rest of the world to see. To his lover Tholindis, Rerir was a humble Kingsguard. To his friends, he was a loyal intelligence officer. But to himself, he was something far darker. Because behind that uniform, behind that tired smile, Rerir was an executioner. Under direct orders from King Irmin himself, Rerir was tasked with hunting down the last remnants of an ancient bloodline, the descendants of the Crimson Moon Dynasty. Because while most of us grew used to hearing about the Eclipse Dynasty, the rulers of Khaenri'ah before the Cataclysm, there was another line that came before it, a dynasty that was nearly wiped from history, the Crimson Moon Dynasty. But why did King Irmin want them gone? And why did he trust a common man to carry out such a task?
So either Rerir is hunting survivors of the Crimson Moon Dynasty, or he's hunting gods.
The Crimson Moon Dynasty came before the Eclipse Dynasty, ruling during a time when a crimson moon was said to shine over Khaenri'ah. This was likely the era that followed the fall of the 3 moons, when the crimson shadow of the iridescent moon sank into the abyssal sea. Our first record of this dynasty comes from a book called Parenheri, and when it was first discovered, it shocked the Genshin community, because inside was a revelation that changed everything we thought we knew about Khaenri'ah. The story was said to come from an ancient Khaenri'an legend passed down and rewritten by countless authors over the centuries. The only surviving copies are found in Fontaine, making its accuracy uncertain, but its value undeniable. According to Parenheri, a sage once advised the ruler of the Crimson Moon Dynasty to create an institution that would care for descenders, alien children destined to transcend the gods. The ruler agreed, and soon the orphanage was filled with children from across Teyvat and potentially from different planets, including an outlander named Parenheri. In fact, this was the very book Fatui director Piero urged Arlecchino to read, a record meant to help her uncover the truth about who she really was. Arlecchino wields a power unlike anyone else in Teyvat, the Balmoon Bloodfire. This power was passed down to Arlecchino, a direct descendant of the Crimson Moon Dynasty's royal bloodline. According to her, the Crimson Moon is nothing more than the shattered remains of the iridescent moon, fused with the abyss to prolong its lifespan. That means the Balmoon Bloodfire she inherited is a fusion of the iridescent moon's former power and the corruption of the abyss. This ancient power comes at a cost, because of course it does. The more it's used, the more it eats away at the heart. If the corruption ever reaches it, the host loses everything, their will, their identity, and their soul. That's why Arlecchino wields it with such restraint, because she knows that one mistake could turn her into something completely unrecognizable. You can say that the Balmoon Bloodfire makes her one of the most dangerous beings alive. Her flames can erase memories, she can shape them into weapons, wings, and living constructs. You can see just how powerful she is from her boss fight. Records uncovered by the Netzitzenkreuz Ordo suggest that during the height of the Crimson Moon era, alchemy flourished and military power grew rapidly. But that prosperity would not last. The book ends with a haunting line. The crimson moon set and the dark sun descended into a yet darker dusk. That moment marked the dynasty's fall and the rise of the Eclipse dynasty under King Irmin, the final ruler of Khaenri'ah. You could say there were plenty of reasons for King Irmin to fear the Crimson Moon Dynasty. The most obvious is that the Crimson Moon Dynasty came from a rival royal bloodline, one that could challenge or even overthrow Irmin's claim to power. Some members of that fallen dynasty still sought to reclaim their authority. Even distant relatives could have inherited the Balmung Bloodfire. To Irmin, that alone might have been enough reason to strike first. But Nefer suggests something darker. She claims the massacre of the Crimson Moon's ascendants was tied to the Vinster King's research, experiments that delved into forbidden knowledge and the Abyss. According to Orlog, King Irmin repeatedly tried to force the Crimson Moon Dynasty to hand over their secrets again and again. When they refused, he turned to violence. Maybe he killed them out of frustration or for all the reasons he'd convinced himself were right. Or maybe those deaths were part of something far worse. Perhaps Irmin needed the mass slaughter to fuel his research, to unlock a hidden power that demanded sacrifice. Or maybe he needed to destroy a competing abyssal power before his own could succeed. Vedrfolnir tried to warn him. He told the king that his obsession would doom Khaenri'ah, that the path he walked would end in ruin. But Irmin had already lost reason. Fearing Vedrfolnir's wisdom as a visionary, he had his eyes gouged out, temporarily cutting off his ability to see the future. Irmin's pursuit of power didn't stop there. He would go on to use the Traveler's sibling as a vessel, a means to absorb limitless abyssal energy. And in doing so, he set the stage for the near annihilation of the world itself. Believe it or not, these Archon Quests weren't actually the first time we heard about this story. And I mean, this is Genshin Impact we're talking about. It wouldn't be real Genshin lore unless something that shows up years later was first teased in some random obscure item. And in this case, it's the Xbox exclusive Wing Glider, the Wings of Fate's course intertwined. The lore of the Xbox exclusive glider is told from Dainsleif's perspective, and it might reveal the fate of King Irmin. The text uses the word regicide, which means the act of killing a king or the person who commits it. And because of that, we have good reason to believe that on the night Dainsleif saved his brother, Vedrfolnir, he and the 5 sinners, all except Rerir maybe, carried out the assassination of King Irmin himself. After Irmin became indisposed, Antorphus Alberic stepped in to rule as regent. Alberic clan meaning Kaya's family clan. But that word, indisposed, leaves room for doubt. It could mean the assassination failed and Irmin was left gravely injured or unwell. Or also likely it was a cover story, a way to keep the people of Khaenri'ah from realizing their king had been overthrown or killed from treason. King Irmin's name is interesting and honestly, kind of suspicious. According to Rerir, his full name is Irminsul. In Genshin, the Irminsul is the giant world tree database that stores all the information and memories of Teyvat through the ley lines. It existed long before King Irmin ever came to power, so why would he share its name? In real-world Germanic mythology, Irminsul, Old Saxon for Great Pillar, refers to a sacred world tree or cosmic pillar that connects heaven and earth. It symbolized a bridge between realms, law, order, and a divine connection between humans and the gods. Basically, it's considered the foundation of the world. That's what makes his name such a contradiction. Irminsul represents creation and order, but King Irmin became the complete opposite. He was supposed to uphold the world, but in his arrogance, he corrupted the very idea it stood for. He is literally the antithesis of what the Irminsul is supposed to be. He broke the laws of Teyvat by using forbidden knowledge from the Abyss, potentially rejected the rule of Celestia, and even carried out mass genocide against the Crimson Moon Dynasty. His own actions helped spark the cataclysm itself. It's poetic irony. The man who bore the name of the world's foundation became the man who tried to tear it apart. In Genshin's lore, Irminsul isn't just a tree. It's a living database, the memory of the world itself, constantly storing and rehashing information. So if the Vinster King's name was Irminsul, it could mean two things. Either he saw himself as the center of the world, the pillar that held everything together, or he chose that name to claim dominion over it, to become Irminsul. Ugh, the arrogation of mankind! He probably called himself Irminsul not because he was actually divine or anything, but because he wanted to be. His experiments with abyssal energy and his use of the Traveler's sibling as a vessel might point to one of his goals, to rebuild the world tree in his own image, to correct what he saw as Celestia's false order. Again, the irony is brutal. The damage he caused has echoed across Teyvat for over 500 years. He was also known as the Finster King. The word Finster comes from Middle German and literally means darkness. So calling Irmin the Finster King could mean several things. It describes him as a king of darkness, which makes sense considering he turned to the abyss. It could also connect to the Eclipse dynasty itself. The word eclipse suggests darkness covering light, and in the Chinese version of the game, the dynasty's name more accurately translates to the Black Sun Dynasty, a solar eclipse where the moon blots out the sun. But Irmin wasn't always like this. He started as a rational and capable ruler who genuinely wanted to strengthen Khaenri'ah. He was originally sane of mind. Over time, though, exposure to the abyss and the will of the abyss changed him. His ideas became extreme and twisted, likely because he was exposed to forbidden knowledge, information that doesn't belong to Teyvat. This kind of knowledge can't be understood or accepted by the world. It changes and corrupts anything it touches, whether it's a person or an object. According to Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, forbidden knowledge comes from the deepest part of the abyss, and anyone who tries to use it or is close to it ends up suffering from ill effects. King Irmin wasn't the only one responsible for the cataclysm, but his actions played a major role in setting it all in motion. The 5 sinners also played their part, which brings us back to Rerir. Rerir was at first glance an ordinary man, a loyal subject who served as an executioner under a quote-unquote evil king. I'm not trying to justify his actions. This is a fictional story, and Rerir is a villain, one of my favorite villains in all of Genshin, in fact. I just want to understand his character, and I think there are a few reasons why someone like Rerir could end up in that position. For one, there might have been propaganda. King Irmin and his followers could have spread the idea that the Crimson Moon Dynasty was dangerous, that its descendants were enemies of the state, plotting to overthrow the king. To the public, anyone against the Crimson Moon Dynasty might have seemed like a patriot, someone protecting his country from a rival bloodline. So to Rerir, those executions were quote-unquote justice, the elimination of threats to the kingdom. It's possible that Khaenri'ah's people were slowly indoctrinated, taught to hate and fear the Crimson Moon Dynasty. But I'd like to think the operation Rerir took part in was highly secret. Most people probably had no idea it was even happening. Rerir tells himself that if his friends knew what he was doing, they'd understand. To them, he's just an intelligence officer, someone doing classified work for the good of the nation. Even Dainsleif compares his role to Nefer's, calling it a kind of information gathering, but no amount of justification could hide what he was becoming. The more people Rerir killed, the harder it became to lie to himself. His victims kept getting younger and more innocent. What began as the execution of supposed traitors slowly turned into the slaughter of civilians and eventually children. His youngest victim, heartbreakingly, was only 6 years old. Nefer notes that during this time, as Rerir filed the reports of the people he'd killed, the gloomier he looked. With each report, we see a man slipping further away from reason and eventually crushed under the weight of what he'd done. The real shock comes when the woman he loves, the one he dreamed of marrying, ends up on his list of targets.
Genshin pulls strongly from this myth, then Tholindis might even turn out to be Rerir's lost lover.
Tholindis was part of the Crimson Moon Dynasty. Her lineage is distant, and she lacked their signature mark, the cross-shaped eye that Arlecchino and Orlog share. Yet that small difference was enough to hide her from suspicion. When Rerir discovered that his next target was Tholindis, something inside him finally broke. Being ordered to kill Tholindis forced him to see how twisted his world had become. His love for her mattered more than anything in his life, and that's part of what makes him so tragic. He could see the horrors, but only once it affected his own life. Tholindis wasn't innocent either. She hid her heritage from him, hoping he could still be saved. She believed there was good left in him, even as he carried out the slaughter of her people. Their love became a desperate illusion. Two people clinging to each other, or rather, lies about each other, while their kingdom collapsed around them. Rerir eventually spared Frithur, another Crimson Moon descendant, when he realized just how far King Irmin had fallen. But by then, redemption was too late. The executions, the lies, and the guilt had already changed him. Before everything fell apart, Tholindis was a researcher stationed at the Moon Marrow Lab under the Universitas Magistrorum. Her work focused on the remains of the Crimson Moon, studying how its marrow could serve as a new source of energy for Khaenri'ah. But her research never really went anywhere. When King Irmin shifted the kingdom's priorities toward his abyssal experimentations, the Universitas's funding and staff were redirected. Tholindis was left alone, the only one still studying the Crimson Moon's marrow. That isolation, however, led her to a shocking discovery. She found that moon marrow could open a gateway to another world. It wasn't a clean, stable gateway, but a dangerous rift made of both lunar and abyssal energy. Still, it was proof that with the Crimson Moon's power, you could reach a world beyond Teyvat itself. As Irmin slipped deeper into madness and ordered the purge of every Crimson Moon descendant, Tholindis began to fear for her life. She blamed his insanity on a mysterious outsider, clearly referring to the traveler's sibling, and wondered if removing that being could restore balance to the world. Before the cataclysm, she entrusted Rerir, another descendant, with a fragment of the Crimson Moon, telling her to keep it safe so their bloodline would never die out. It is believed that the piece of the Crimson Moon was passed down from Rerir to her descendants until it finally reached Arlecchino. When Dainsleif led his assault on the palace to rescue Vedrfolnir, Tholindis was trapped inside the Universitas. The release of abyssal energy turned the lab into chaos. With monsters flooding the hall, she barricaded herself in a room and waited for the end until Rerir found her. Vedrfolnir had secretly warned him that Tholindis was in danger, and Rerir arrived just in time. But when he entered, he found her standing before a glowing rift. A moon gate. She admitted she knew who he truly was and what he had done, but she didn't hate him. Instead, she said she had found a way to give him a normal life. Then she said, "Our wedding day will have to wait." Before Rerir could stop her, she went into the portal and disappeared. The truth of where Tholindis went is still one of Genshin's biggest mysteries. The simplest theory is that she crossed into the Crimson Moon's realm, a space between Teyvat and the Abyss. That would explain why we later see echoes of her memories inside the Crimson Moon domain. If this is true, she might have merged with the abyssal consciousness that governs the world. But there's another possibility that involves time. Rerir's lore states that his body was torn apart and thrown into the swirling chaos of time. That wording suggests something more than just teleporting or something with space. It could imply that the Moongate could have been a time portal. If that's true, Tholindis might have traveled to another point in history, maybe to prevent the cataclysm or to stop King Irmin from using the traveler's sibling as a vessel. Her last words to Rerir, "Our wedding day will have to wait," sound more like a promise than a goodbye. She might have believed she was coming back. But personally, I don't think that's how time travel works in Genshin. I think it's closer to what we saw in the Space and Time for You Archon Quest. More like time bending rather than someone jumping through a time portal. For Tholindis to pull off something like this, the god of time Istaroth would almost certainly have to be involved. Then there's what I like to call the two worlds theory. This idea proposes that Teyvat isn't a single planet, but rather two worlds forcibly merged together. The world of Teyvat and the world of the Abyss. They exist side by side, sharing the same space, but they aren't meant to. They're fundamentally incompatible, like two halves of a body sewn together. This theory might temporarily explain a lot of Genshin's deeper mysteries while we don't have the real answers. Why does forbidden knowledge corrupt everything it touches? Why are we constantly fighting the Abyss? Why does Teyvat seem to reject certain things that don't belong to this world? It's because these two worlds, Teyvat and the Abyss, are constantly in conflict, each one trying to overwrite or reject the other's existence. In this theory, the celestial nails serve as literal nails, keeping the two halves of the world stable and prevent them from fully tearing apart. The nails suppress forbidden knowledge because that knowledge belongs to the other world. The moon marrow Tholindis studied was created from the shattered remains of the iridescent moon, fused with abyssal energy. In other words, the moon gate she opened is a literal bridge between these two incompatible worlds. If that's true, Tholindis is probably somewhere in the Abyss. Either way, her disappearance guaranteed two things: her survival and Rerir's unfortunate descent into madness. By stepping through that gate, she not only saved herself, she prevented Rerir from having to kill her, potentially ending her bloodline. It was her final act of love and the unfortunate start of Rerir's fall. Rerir was never the same after that day. He became one of the 5 sinners, Conrians who consumed abyssal power in search of something greater. In his case, that something was Tholindis. He hoped that if he embraced the Abyss, he could follow her through that moon gate and bring her back. Even Dainsleif was stunned by his betrayal. Rerir wasn't a man of ambition. He was simply someone who wanted to live and love. Yet when the moment came, he chose the Abyss over his nation. He opened a portal and stepped inside, abandoning Conria to its fate. The portal tore his body apart, scattering his fragments across Nod-Krai. The reason Rerir was torn apart by the chaos of time when he crossed the moon gate while Tholindis passed through safely likely comes down to 2 possibilities. Tholindis was a descendant of the Crimson Moon Dynasty, and the portal itself was powered by the energy of the Crimson Moon. That connection probably allowed her to harmonize with its energy and survive the passage. Rerir, on the other hand, came from the Eclipse Dynasty, and he may have been fundamentally incompatible with the gate's lunar energy. It's also possible that the gate he opened later wasn't stable. Without Tholindis' research or the proper conditions, his attempt might have ripped open an incomplete or distorted rift, one that couldn't sustain him, tearing his body apart as he crossed. But he survived. The abyssal power he absorbed kept his consciousness alive, binding it to the world in the form of the Wild Hunt. Each monster that roamed Nod-Krai were fragments of him. Over the centuries, Rerir obsessed over the 3 moons. He ordered the Wild Hunt to collect the fragments of his body and consume Kuvaki to rebuild himself. All of it for one purpose: to find Tholindis again. There's a haunting moment in the lore where Rerir hears a voice in his mind, a voice he believes belongs to Vedrfolnir. When they finally meet, Vedrfolnir laughs and says,
"So, you hear it too? The voice that steals your mind, gains your trust, and drives you crazy."
There are 2 ways to read this. The first is that the Abyss was imitating Vedrfolnir's voice. We know the Abyss can mimic both living beings and voices. It's done so before, notably in the Natlan Archon Quests, where it imitated the voices of previous Pyro Archons. Rerir trusted Vedrfolnir deeply, so if the Abyss wanted to manipulate him, that voice would be the perfect tool. The second theory is even more chilling, that it was really Vedrfolnir. After the Cataclysm, Vedrfolnir took on the form of a suspended purple crystal, able to influence the minds of others. Dainsleif later implied that Vedrfolnir's consciousness could exist across time itself, past, present, and future all at once. According to the weapon lore from Stygian Onslaught, each of the 5 sinners mirrors one of the 4 shades and the heavenly principles. Their powers are twisted reflections of their divine concepts. Life for Rhyndaughtr and Nibirius, death for Rerir and Renova, time for Vedrfolnir and Istaroth, space for Sertologi and Asmodee, and reason for Roptatyr and the heavenly principles themselves. If Rerir represents the blasphemy of death, then Vedrfolnir is almost certainly the blasphemy of time. His powers seem to imitate Istaroth, the god of time. But unlike Istaroth, whose voice could travel through time to guide and protect, Vedrfolnir's version of that power is warped. This means the voices that Rerir and Vedrfolnir heard could have been Vedrfolnir's future self. It would explain why he smiled creepily when Rerir mentioned the voice. He figured it out. When Rerir was banished from Teyvat, we're told he was cast outside the world through a moon gate. We don't know where that is. Maybe the Crimson Moon realm, maybe somewhere in the Abyss, or maybe even outer space. Wherever he went, one thing is certain: he likely hasn't found Tholindis yet. Vedrfolnir told him, whatever trials you may face, be steadfast in your path. For as long as you live, your story with Tholindis shall not come to an end. His story isn't finished yet, and Hoyoverse seems to agree. The next chapter might connect some of the loose ends of his story or put it on hold momentarily. So what's next for Rerir and Tholindis? We know their story isn't over, and maybe the key to understanding how it continues lies within Durin. Durin's story mirrors theirs in more ways than one. Created by Rhyndaughtr through Chemia, Durin was a powerful alchemical being. During the Cataclysm, he attacked Mondstadt, but it wasn't because he was evil. In truth, he never asked to be a monster. In the end, Dvalin was forced to kill him, and Durin's body fell onto Dragonspine where it still rests. But that wasn't the end of his story. In Simulanka, a fairy tale world created by 3 members of the Hexen Circle, Alice, Barbeloth, and Andersdaughter, Durin reappears reborn as a storybook version of the original creation. The people there saw him as a terrifying dragon, but in reality, he just wanted friends. Simulanka is a place where old stories can be rewritten and characters can have happier endings. That was Andersdaughter's hope for our Durin, for him to escape the fate tied to his name. So, theoretically, if Durin could exist again in a recreated world, what's stopping the same thing from happening to Rerir and Tholindis? Another version of Rerir and Tholindis could exist where life is kinder to them. It kind of reminds me of Shaoran and Sakura from Tsubasa Chronicles, where their clones were reborn and given another chance at a better life. And just to be clear, I'm not saying Rerir has to be redeemed, but I'm also not saying he doesn't deserve it either. His story could go either way, and that's what makes it interesting. There might be another reason why Durin could be the focus of the next Archon Quest, and it might have something to do with Columbina. Columbina says she feels the world is rejecting her. Because the Frost Moon is sealed beyond the false sky, she doesn't have full access to her power as its successor. Her source of power lies outside Teyvat's boundaries, which means her very existence is treated as something foreign, like data that doesn't belong in the system. In other words, Teyvat itself rejects her. In a way, that situation is actually quite similar to what happened with Durin, the original one created by Reindaughter. Durin was crafted from abyssal energy. Just as forbidden knowledge from the abyss is actively being rejected by Teyvat, he also was something this world couldn't fully accept. His simple wish to see the world ended in tragedy because Teyvat's natural laws rejected what he was. It's also worth noting that the original Durin that attacked Mondstadt believed he was peaceful, that he was trying to make friends, but his very existence brought harm wherever he went. The same thing happened to Alain and Fontaine, another one of Reindaughter's abyssal creations. Both of them seem to exist on a plane of reality that doesn't quite belong to Teyvat. But now, our Durin changes everything. Unlike Reindaughter's creation, Ander's daughter used a fairy tale instead of abyssal alchemy to rewrite Durin's fate, to give him a better life. Through that process and Albedo's alchemy, Mini Durin crossed over into Teyvat and merged with what remained of the original Durin. The result is remarkable, a being that should have been rejected by the world, but no longer is. Durin and Columbina are, in some ways, parallels. Both have origins outside Teyvat, Durin from the Abyss and Columbina from the Frost Moon. Both were rejected by the world, but while Columbina is still recovering and still being rejected, Durin has already been reborn and reintegrated into Teyvat. So, Durin's new existence might hold the answer to Columbina's condition, proof that something once rejected by the world can still be accepted again. Although he was written through human compassion and imagination, that doesn't mean something similar can't happen to Columbina. After all, Dainsleif says we humans have our humanity, and I feel like that line means way more than the story's letting on. Maybe the key to Columbina's true origins isn't just found in Durin, but in someone else who's been working behind the scenes.
The quest literally there ended off with the sound of a vase or something, like a pot
Breaking.
smashing in another room.
Yeah.
Did you pick up on what that was? Do you remember the final act of Sumeru where we first heard Nicole and what that was? On Wanderer's Quest, I think it was?
Wait, there was something that broke in that scene, right? You sound lost and confused.
The whole introduction to Nicole was the vase smashing on the ground and her saying, only trust what you see or something. Or don't trust everything you see.
That's
something like that.
Good catch.
Nicole Reeyn is a member of the Hexen Circle, a prophetess who studies Teyvat's order and direction. Other witches call her the guide who never gets lost, and she has this eerie habit of speaking directly into your mind without warning. Some say she's physically mute, that she's suffocated by her inability to speak. Skirk adds that Nicole once watched the extinction of her own species before becoming human. All of this should tell us she's not like anyone else in Teyvat. We've speculated before that Nicole's species might have been the Seelies, the fallen angels of Teyvat. Back when the heavenly principles ruled without question, angels guided humanity under Celestia's command. But when one of them, Koitar, the first and fairest daughter of heaven, fell in love with an outlander named Vedrfolnir, the order shattered. Her crown broke, she felt love, freedom, and most importantly, rebellion for the first time ever. Together, she and her lover defied the gods. For that sin, a celestial nail was sent on Hyperborea, killing the face spirits and cursing every angel who would ever love again. Koitar and Vedrfolnir would be separated for all eternity and their memories completely wiped. If the angels were really Nicole's species, then her story matches the Seelie curse pretty well. Whether Nicole stayed as a drifting consciousness, only speaking through inanimate objects for centuries, or only recently gained a body isn't confirmed yet. But if she truly came from Hyperborea, it explains everything. Her instinct to protect Nod-Krai, her interference at Hisi Island, even her golden wings and halo in the Song of the Welcome Moon teaser. Nicole might really be an angel or a Seelie who somehow regained a physical form. Her powers of prophecy, telepathy, and guidance all echo the gifts of the ancient angels Nabu Malikata, Sibila, and Yohua Tekutin. Her imagery fits too. She's literally a guide who never gets lost. But if she isn't an angel, maybe she's something made by them, a fey creation from Koitar and Vedrfolnir's forbidden art. They once dreamed of forming beings that could merge with the world. Maybe Nicole is one of their ancient creations. But perhaps there's another layer to it. I noticed an interesting pattern. Columbina can't see, but she perceives the true moon beyond the false sky. Nicole can't speak, but she communicates telepathically. They have heightened versions of the senses they seem to be missing. But all of this feels like a callback to an old proverb. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. The phrase itself comes from ancient Buddhist teachings that were later adopted into Japanese culture. It represents moral discipline, to avoid evil in what you see, what you hear, and what you say. 3 wise monkeys embody each virtue. Mizaru, who covers his eyes, teaches us to see no evil, to look beyond corruption or illusion. Kikazaru, who covers his ears, teaches us to hear no evil, to resist lies and temptation. Now imagine if those virtues were represented in the 3 moon goddesses of Genshin. Each moon could symbolize one of these moral principles, and their downfall could represent what happens when those virtues are broken. The frost moon could embody see no evil, not corrupted by what is seen, preserving clarity and detachment. The iridescent or crimson moon might represent hear no evil. Ironic, since the goddess of it listened to the call of the abyss. The act of hearing what shouldn't be heard might have caused her corruption into the crimson moon. And the eternal moon or Arya could symbolize speak no evil. She represents restraint and truth, the idea that wisdom isn't in speaking constantly but in knowing when to stay silent. Nicole, the mute prophetess, mirrors this perfectly. She even had to learn how to speak less with Alice's guidance. If Columbina embodies sight beyond sight and Nicole embodies speech beyond speech, then it stands to reason that a third goddess could embody hearing beyond hearing, completing the trio. What's fascinating is that all 3 of these principles, vision, speech, and hearing, were present at the first sin of Koitar and Vedrfolnir. The 3 moon sisters once saw the forbidden union of Koitar and Vedrfolnir. They heard their plans to defy the heavenly principles, and they stayed silent, their inaction perhaps sealing their fate. The same 3 acts that once symbolized moral purity became their downfall. Araligino is one of the last heirs of the Crimson Moon Dynasty and currently has the Crimson Moon's marrow. Columbina is seen as a successor of the Frost Moon, but there's still one missing figure: the successor of the Eternal Moon. I believe Nicole fits that position perfectly, especially if the Traveler can't hold onto Arya's moon marrow forever. It would make perfect sense for Nicole to inherit it. She literally speaks only when it matters, and only in the minds of those who need it, an embodiment of speak no evil which we assign to Arya, the goddess of the Eternal Moon. Columbina says the Luonnotar had the blessing of a moon goddess, but not hers. If it wasn't Sonnet, identity still uncertain, it could have been Nicole, acting in Arya's stead. The Luonnotar color palette matches Nicole's as well. But wait, there's something I want you to remember. Nicole's first line to us is believe your own eyes. Only that which you see is true. What is unseen is but an illusion. Isn't that something the Frost Moon would say? Why yes, that's the point. The moons aren't completely separate. Their virtues are interconnected. Nicole can share the Frost Moon's idea of see no evil while still representing speak no evil. So they don't avoid a virtue just because it belongs to another moon, but rather they use it to keep the lunar system steady. Here's a wild theory, and I can't stress this enough. Please take it with a grain of salt. In my own personal musings, Nicole being connected to the Eternal Moon makes the most sense. And I've been thinking about that for a while now, but just hear me out this one time. I don't know why, but part of me still feels like Columbina being the Frost Moon or the reborn Frost Moon goddess might be a red herring? Something about it doesn't sit right. She keeps saying she's being rejected by the world, but what if that isn't because she's the Frost Moon, but because she's something else entirely? Rejected like the 4th moon in Nod-Krai's prophecy, the one that failed to form? Nod-Krai itself is said to be the remnant of that failed moon, and the prophecy foretells that one day a new moon will rise. I think this new moon might not be the Frost Moon at all, but the Welkin Moon, the projection of a moon we see in Teyvat's false sky. This patch is called Song of the Welkin Moon, and Columbina is the centric character. In one of my earlier videos, I explained why I believe the Welkin Moon and the Frost Moon are connected. The Welkin Moon could be a reflection of the Frost Moon, almost like a snapshot. A photocopy of the Frost Moon rather. That could explain why Columbina feels tied to the Frost Moon's power but still says she doesn't have its moon marrow. And that's an important detail because moon marrow only exists after the death of a moon goddess, which means the true goddess of the Frost Moon might still be alive. Even Skirk says that the will of the Frost Moon is still alive, just dormant. The light of the true Frost Moon was shown to be gold, which matches the golden glow of Nicole's powers. And then there's the Kuhenki, those strange moonlight beings that can turn into Luonnotar after receiving the blessing of a moon goddess. But here's the twist. The Luonnotar didn't receive Columbina's blessing. So whose blessing was it? What if it's the OG goddess of the Frost Moon? What if it was Nicole's? We even see Nicole having tea with a Kuhenki in the first Song of the Welcome Moon teaser while she narrates over the trailer. Now take this with a huge grain of salt. I'm just being a little contrarian for the sake of theory crafting, but what if Columbina isn't the Frost Moon and Nicole is somehow connected instead? And it's possible that Nicole could even be a Kuhenki herself. Skirk mentioned that Nicole spends her time sculpting, and the Kuhenki are shown to be gifted artists. Maybe she's a Kuhenki who gained human form recently? But there's still another layer to this. What if Nicole isn't a Kuhenki at all, but someone much older, like Koitar, the first angel who fell in love with the Voyager and rebelled against the heavenly principles, which led to the downfall of the Seelie race? I'm not completely sure about this one either. The only reason I'm hesitant to fully believe my own research towards this theory is because of Koitar's curse. It states their cruel punishment was to be separated from each other for eternity and to have their memories wiped without a trace. The phrase "without a trace" makes it sound almost impossible for Koitar to ever regain her memories. So if Nicole really were Koitar, I doubt she'd remember Hyperborea or her past life at all. It's possible that only fragments of her memories returned, maybe everything except her love for Vedrfolnir. But the thing is, Nicole clearly remembers the fall of her nation. That's strange because if she's Koitar, she shouldn't be able to remember that at all. If I had to rank them, it would go like this. Nicole as a successor of the Eternal Moon is my top theory. Second, she could be the true successor of the Frost Moon. Third, she might be a Kuhenki or a Seelie who recently gained a human form. Fourth, she could be Koitar herself. Fifth, and a curveball, she could be the Welcome Moon. But I'm keeping the door open to all of these possibilities. There was a commenter who pointed out something I had decided to bookmark for later during my research, and honestly, I'm so glad they told me to look into it now. So thank you Sonub8196 for bringing this up. In the Finnish national epic Kalevala, there's a story about Ilmatar, known as the Maiden of Air or Luonnotar. She existed alone in a vast endless sea of wind and emptiness. One day, she became pregnant by the wind and the waves, and for many years carried the hero Väinämöinen. During that time, an eagle built a nest on her knee and laid eggs that would eventually break and give birth to the world itself. The fragments of the eggs became the earth, sky, moon, sun, and stars. The white of the egg became the moon, and the yolk became the sun. Sound familiar? If you've read Before Sun and Moon, it should, because in Genshin, the heavenly principles are also said to have been born from an egg, using its eggshell to form the firmament, the barrier that separates Teyvat from outer space. The false sky is an eggshell. After Ilmatar shapes the world, she gives birth to Väinämöinen, a wise hero whose footsteps create rivers, lakes, and islands. Already the parallels between this myth and Genshin's cosmology are very apparent. In the same Finnish mythology, Koitar is the goddess of the moon. She's said to own the gold of the moon, spinning golden yarns and weaving clothes made of moonlight. In old songs, young maidens would even pray to her, asking for pieces of her golden jewelry or the silken clothes she weaves. This detail immediately reminded me of Columbina's birth, where countless Kuhenki wove the moonlight that bathed her into silken vestments fit for a goddess. The symbolism goes even deeper. Koitar's golden weaving represents beauty, craft, and the flow of time. Her threads mirror the moon's cyclical phases. And since the Frost Moon's light in Genshin glows gold, that connection feels intentional. The Frost Moon may actually represent this golden moon from the Ilmatar myth. Now let's talk about Päivätar. Her name comes from Päivä, meaning day. She's often seen as the sun goddess. In the myths, Päivätar and Koitar work side by side, spinning silver and golden clothes, symbolizing the balance between sun and moon, and day and night. In some songs, their tears even give birth to a tree, which is fascinating because it echoes Genshin's Irminsul, the database of the entire world. We've long suspected on this channel that Irminsul might have lunar origins, and this myth supports that idea. That is, if Hoyoverse really decided to draw deep inspiration from this myth. Then there's Koitar, the goddess of the dawn. She's not as prominent in Finnish mythology, often only mentioned in passing, alongside Päivätar and Koitar. Together, they represent dawn, day, and night. Ilmatar is the creator of the world. Koitar ushers in the dawn. Päivätar brings the day, and Koitar governs the night. But there's a darker figure found in Genshin's lore. The Night Mother. In one of my favorite books, The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, she's described as ruling over the land of night, a world without light. She is the source of all sin, a being who watches without empathy, heart, or voice, punishing those who disobey her rule. The only thing she cannot bear is moonlight. That line changes everything, because what if the Night Mother isn't some distant evil goddess, but Koitar herself? Think about it. Koitar was once the Dawn Star, the brightest of angels, the first and fairest daughter of the heavenly principles. But when she fell in love with Vedrfolnir and rebelled against her creator, everything changed. For that act, she and her entire race were cursed. She may have committed what we could call the first sin, and in The Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, the Night Mother is described as the source of all sin. So what if the Night Mother is her, a fallen angel who can no longer stand the light she was once made of? She is said to have no heart and no mouth, a punishment for loving too deeply, for speaking forbidden truths. This recontextualizes the Night Mother's entire story. The fall of the angels and the land of night may all trace back to Koitar's punishment, a transformation so complete that her entire being was lost. But while Nicole might be guiding events from the shadows, there's someone else lurking there too. Someone whose motives are far darker. Who is the other person helping Rerir? There are really only two possibilities. Either we're about to meet another sinner, or it's Fatui Harbinger Ildatore. Early in Act 3, Varka mentioned that he'd tried to track Rerir but was deliberately led astray.
And from everything you told me, it sounds like his scheming began well before his return. So maybe luring me away was all a part of his plan. But is it even possible that he orchestrated all of this by himself?
This tells us someone else was involved. Someone who helped Rerir become whole again to use him as a pawn. Each of the 5 sinners represent a distortion of one of Teyvat's laws: life, death, time, space, and reason. Rerir embodies death as the blasphemy of death. So who would complement death? Someone tied to life or time. That points to Rhyndaughtr or Vedrfolnir. Just as a quick side note, both Rerir and Vedrfolnir seem to have turned into crystals after the cataclysm. Rerir's fragments become crystals shattered across Nod-Krai, forming the Wild Hunt, while Vedrfolnir himself transformed into a giant purple crystal. What's even more interesting is that during Act 2, Rerir shouts Rhyndaugtr's name, which makes me wonder if she suffered a similar fate, and was the reason why she needed to merge with a weakened Nibirius to survive. But the most grounded possibility is Ildatore. He's obsessed with Khaenri'ah, cloning, artificial immortality, and godhood. Rerir would be the perfect test subject, a Khaenri'an who merged with the Abyss and survived without fully decaying. And knowing his track record, manipulating Scaramouche and deceiving Sumeru's sages, it wouldn't be the first time he's hidden behind someone else's tragedy to conduct his own experiments. After all, his stronghold is somewhere in Nod-Krai. Or maybe there's a third option and it's Tholindis' consciousness or something. But speaking of harbingers, let's talk about another one. The one I find myself liking more and more after every new patch. Genshin finally confirmed something we've been theorizing about for a long time: the connection between Sandrone and Alain Guillotin. Alain was the brilliant Fontaine engineer who founded the Fontaine Research Institute of Kinetic Energy Engineering, responsible for much of the nation's technology and automaton advancements. Sandrone knew him personally. She understood his ideals, his connection to Renee and Jacob, and how all 3 were driven by the same goal: protecting Fontaine, even if it led them down very different paths. According to legend, Alain retired in his later years, isolating himself in his workshop and dedicating the rest of his life to secret research. None of his final work was ever published, but evidence in his lab suggests that he built something. Or someone. Before his death, Alain asked Sandrone to destroy all of his manuscripts. She agreed, but not before reading them herself, unwilling to let his life's work fade into obscurity. And here's where the theory comes full circle. While it's not officially confirmed, it's highly likely that Sandrone herself is that final creation, an automaton built by Alain Guillotin, modeled after his late sister, Marianne. Her appearance and her obsession with perfection probably reflect the final evolution of his genius and his grief. If she isn't that creation herself, then she likely knows exactly what it was. Perhaps the Kuvaki Design Experiment Bureau in Nod-Krai is part of continuing Alain's legacy? Since we were speaking of people moving in the shadows, there's one person whose story I keep circling back to no matter how far we go: Dainsleif. Was Dainsleif aware of Rerir's role in the Crimson Moon genocide? My quick answer: no, it doesn't seem like he was. From what we see in the Luna 2 quests, Dainsleif believed Rerir was just an intelligence officer, not someone carrying out mass executions of innocent people. There's even a moment where Dainsleif asks Rerir if Tholindis knew what his real job was, and the tone of that question alone tells us everything. Nobody says committing genocide is a cooler job than being a royal guard. The biggest clue is in Rerir's own words. When he discovers that Tholindis was part of the Crimson Moon bloodline, he says,
"What a fool I've been. Numbing myself with talk of justice. Even imagining my friends would back me up."
Which to me confirms that his friends, including Dainsleif, didn't know what was really happening. It's possible the massacre was a covert operation, hidden even from the king's closest men, or disguised through propaganda. But would King Irmin really keep it secret from his own captain of the royal guard? Absolutely. This is King Irmin we're talking about, the man who's been sussing out Vedrfolnir and eventually gouged his eyes out, based on suspicions that only Rerir seemed to know about. Later, when Dainsleif frees Vedrfolnir from prison, Rhine-daughter remarks,
You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?
That single line tells me that Dainsleif had already started losing faith in the king long before Vedrfolnir's punishment. He'd been watching Irmin spiral into madness, waiting for a moment to act. Now I'm all for Dainsleif having a darker past, but based on everything we've seen in Luna 2, it doesn't seem like he knowingly endorsed genocide. Still, there's something deeper about Dainsleif that keeps pulling me in. At a crucial point in the story, Dainsleif opens a moon gate. His title, the Twilight Sword, suddenly takes on a new meaning. Twilight is the phase between day and night, and that's what a moon gate seems to be, a liminal bridge between the light and the dark. If the Eclipse Dynasty had some power to manipulate portals or moon gates like this, Dainsleif could have also inherited that power. Maybe Irmin's experiments with the Irminsul or the Abyss impacted Dainsleif. I just want to point out something real quick. We see 3 different colored moon portals: Tholindis' purple portal, Rerir's red portal, and Dainsleif and Columbina's blue one. Those colors actually match the shades that Columbina's flowers turn. It makes me wonder if blue represents the purest form of lunar energy, especially since a similar color shows up in anything related to Irminsul. Red could symbolize abyssal energy, while purple might represent a fusion of the two, like how the iridescent moon eventually became the Crimson Moon. I'm still not entirely sure how well this theory holds up, since I used to associate purple more strongly with the Abyss, but it's an interesting pattern to think about. The Ouroboros symbolism fits Dainsleif perfectly. Vedrfolnir's chess piece is shaped like the serpent devouring its own tail, a symbol also tied to Dainsleif's possible constellation. In alchemy, the Ouroboros represents creation and destruction looping forever. Vedrfolnir might represent cosmic recursion, time itself looping endlessly, while Dainsleif embodies mortal recursion, a man cursed to live through the same tragedy over and over, reliving the fall of Conria and other civilizations with no escape. But maybe Dainsleif is the key to breaking Teyvat's endless loop. There's still so much we don't know about him, and honestly, I think I'm long overdue for a full Dainsleif video. But here's something I want you to think about. Ouroboros, the serpent that eats its own tail, is only mentioned by name once in all of Genshin Impact, in Before Sun and Moon. It was described as an imaginary serpent god once worshipped in Enkanomiya. So if Dainsleif's constellation is Snake Ring or Ouroboros, what does that make him? It would be incredibly ironic. A man who hates the gods, but is unknowingly the vessel for one. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. I'm your leafy lore keeper Minsleif, and I read the Genshin Impact lore so that you don't have to.